When you're trying to board a train in the or get off the train in the underground, there's the usual cry, "Mind the gap!" It and it's a sort of metaphorical expression, isn't it? It's become routine to hear this in all manner of strange places, and I think we could hear it in Parliament at the moment and in politics. And the problem isn't just Nigel Farage. It's not even Reform UK. The problem isn't this void, which people try to suggest that Farage is simply an absence rather than a presence. The problem is the Conservative Party's failure to provide leadership, coherence, even the semblance of a plan. If the Tories were serious about regaining political dominance, then they would find a real leader. Instead, they watched the circus unfold, giggling nervously, while hoping that time, rather than policy competence or charisma, will find something to restore their fortunes. They know that Farage is a fool. The problem is that history may not repeat itself in the way that they expect. It's not the Farage factor. It's the Badenoch Truss, May, Sunak, Johnson factor, the ongoing crisis of this parade of inadequacy. The last 15 years of British politics have been defined by the tension between grand ideals and grim practicality, and the right has dominated political theory, backed by a press that amplifies its rhetoric but has failed disastrously in execution. Meanwhile, Labour has veered towards pragmatic managerialism, marketing itself as a safe pair of hands, an approach that neither excites nor reassures a restless electorate. And the Conservatives, meanwhile, have failed to address the fundamental flaw of capitalism. Without government intervention, wealth accumulates at the top while frustration simmers below. And rather than addressing this, Tory chancellors chose austerity, deepening social divides, feeding the anger that led to Brexit. And while Brexit was meant to be their crowning achievement, it has instead become the millstone round their neck. They promised sovereignty, prosperity and control. They delivered none of that. This week, Keir Starmer became the first British leader to attend a European Council meeting since Brexit, and the irony is thick. A Labour Prime Minister must clean up the mess the Conservatives made. Yet Labour's attempt at pragmatism, trying to patch up Brexit while avoiding the label of rejoiner, doesn't inspire confidence either. Instead, it plays into the hands of Farage, who continues to posture as the anti-establishment rebel, despite being one of the architects of the disaster that has befallen us all. Farage, of course, has miraculously escaped blame for Brexit's failures. It's extraordinary. Never having been in government, he can argue that the political class sabotaged his grand vision, rather than admitting that it was riddled with contradictions from the start. I'm not shallow. He thrives on anger rather than solutions. He thrives on possibilities rather than reality. And anger, as history shows, is an incredibly effective political currency. It worked alarmingly well during the 1930s. And the latest polling shows Reform UK overtaking Labour as Britain's most popular party. Well, popularity isn't power, of course. It's a seismic moment, but it's not entirely a surprising one. And across Europe, the populist right has weaponised climate action, immigration, economic discontent, farming, framing green policies and regulatory burdens as assaults on the working class. And Farage, ever the opportunist, has done the same, calling for the scrapping of net zero targets while painting Labour as a party of out-of-touch technocrats. The Conservatives, rather than countering this with leadership, seem content to wait. Kemi Badenoch's increasing alignment with Reform UK's position suggests she believes that adopting a harder right stance will shore up Tory support. But waiting for Farage to implode is a strategy, not a plan. And if history is any indication, it's a strategy doomed to failure. Because Farage will simply change his rhetoric. And Labour, meanwhile, risks falling into the same trap. By attempting to neutralise right-wing attacks rather than offering a compelling vision, it has resorted to awkward contradictions, pledging to make Heathrow expansion easier while simultaneously committing to climate goals, cracking down on benefit fraud while ignoring corporate tax evasion, and re-establishing trade ties with the EU while insisting Brexit is settled. But Brexit isn't settled. It cannot be. Farage knows this, and that's why he thrives. He knows he doesn't need to provide answers. He only needs to stir resentment. He only needs to stir the pot by railing against EU laws, the Westminster elite, and the betrayal of Brexit. He frames himself as the only honest broker in Brexit politics. Labour cannot afford to be complacent. If it hopes to defeat Farage and the broader forces of reactionary populism, it must offer more than incremental change. It must acknowledge the fundamental economic and social failures that led to Brexit in the first place. That means confronting the hard realities of Britain's place in the world rather than merely managing the status quo. And the Tories, meanwhile, have a choice. Accept that they need a leader capable of rebuilding trust, or continue their slow slide into irrelevance, from which they will not return. Right now they appear to be choosing the latter, and as long as that remains the case, the gap will remain wide open for Farage to fill. And Farage, frankly, has mastered the art of being the thing that plugs a gap, but it's not an efficient thing that plugs the gap. You still have to mind that gap. You still have to avoid the void, because Farage is an illusion. Farage is an illusory plug. There was a time when you used to travel to Russia, you used to have to take your own plug and hope that it would fit in the bath. Farage is that, and it doesn't fit.